Now you're probably wondering why I'm starting off this video showing this dude on the center of the page. Now, this is the start of a new topic. And this person here, his name is Rene Descartes. He was very instrumental and pretty much the key figure in the topic we are talking about. And this is the topic of linear relationships. Now, Descartes, this guy here, he came up with pretty much the universal tool for talking about these linear relationships that we're going to examine in the next few videos. And he was responsible for what we call the number plane, or the XY plane, or some people also call it the Cartesian coordinate system. And that thing is this down here. Now, you may have seen this in your textbooks, or you may be familiar with this type of system we have here. Now, this, I'm just going to call it the XY plane because that's how I was taught it in school. But this is for a large part due to Descartes. So that's why we kind of call it the Cartesian coordinate system sometimes in honor of him. Now, XY plane, center this more. And before we even get to talking about linear relationships, we need to understand this plane because a lot of the examples we're going to be working through have to do with this thing here. Now, this topic is all about how two different variables interact, and the variables are really just my X and Y. So the core of this topic is studying how do different elements react? How does my Y change with my X? So how does one have an effect on the other? Now, enough of that now. We are just going to be talking about in this video how we can navigate this plane. And essentially, what we're doing here is we're really just working with coordinates. We can think of this XY plane kind of as a map, and we are feeding it information, so to speak. Now, an important thing to understand here is that we need to just work out how this map works, right? So as you can see here by the labeled numbers, I have an X direction and a Y direction. Now, as I move from left to right along my X, I'm going in the positive direction. My numbers are getting bigger. We can see here from 0 to 6, and this plane stretches off into very large numbers to infinity pretty much. So from left to right along my X in the horizontal direction, I'm increasing. My X is getting bigger. Now, in the opposite direction, however, my X is decreasing. So you can see here, going from say 0 and moving out this way, my numbers are progressively getting smaller. They're going down by 1 for each little grid line here. We are stretching off into negative infinity, more or less. So let's have a look at the Y as well. Now, it's very similar, but here, all we have to note is that as we go up, we are going in the positive Y direction. And as we go down, in a very similar way to the X, we are going in the negative Y direction. So that is how we can kind of orientate ourselves along this plane. Now we are just going to be looking at plotting coordinates. So when I say the word plot, I don't mean plot as in like the plot of a movie. Plotting just means putting a point kind of on a graph in a mathematical context. So we are going to plot certain points. Now, I'm going to give you here that the point A is the point 2, 3. Now, what is customary in Cartesian coordinates is that this point here tells me how far along in the horizontal direction I'm going to be. So this gives us, it's pretty much our x coordinate. And here is my y coordinate, how far up my point is. So my point pretty much has two elements. It has some horizontal location and some vertical location. And these are denoted by our numbers here. These numbers specifically tell us how far up or how far left and right we have to go. So in plotting these, all we have to do is locate where on the horizontal we are, where on the vertical we are, and just match the point on the grid lines. So here we are in positive 2 along the x-axis. So we are here, positive 2 along the x, and we are positive 3 in the y direction. So I locate on my y that this is up here. And all we're doing is we are kind of following these grid lines and seeing where these two meet. What satisfies 2 along my x and y along my, and 3 along my y, I should say. And these meet exactly here. And you can see once I rub out all of this extra stuff, this was just a tool to help you visualize how we find this. But the point I've plotted satisfies both of these conditions. I've gone 2 in the x direction, up positive 3 in the y direction. Therefore, my point has been plotted correctly. That is my A. Now let's try another one. I'm going to plot the point B, go -1, -5. Now this video is just an introduction into how we work with this type of stuff. So let me actually just zoom in a bit. Probably should have done that earlier, but that's all right. Now, this point here, once again, my x and y's correspond to the same points. So all I'm doing is I'm just locating where on my plane these 2 points lie. When my x is -1, when my y is -5. Now, x is -1. We're no longer looking in the positive part of x. We are looking at this section because now we're dealing with negative numbers. And my -1 falls here. And I'm looking at -5 in my y direction. And that falls, once again, we're not dealing with this bit up here. We're dealing with this bottom section. That is my negative y direction. And my 5 is here. So, once again, all I'm doing is I'm locating these points here. I can just follow my grid along, locate my y, where along the y this is, follow that along, and where these meet is my point B. That's -1, -5. Now, just one more exercise that I'll get you guys to do. I've been giving us coordinates and we've had to plot this on the graph. Now, just for one more example, I'm going to do the opposite. So instead of giving you coordinates, I will give you a point. So I'm going to give you this point here. This is point C. And we are going to determine what the coordinates are. And this is the final exercise to just get us used to navigating this XY plane here. So I want to find where negative C is. I've seen it visually, but I just want some concrete coordinates like I have here and here. So all we have to do, this isn't too daunting because all we do is we know where we are. Now we can just trace down kind of how far we've gone along my X plane. And I can already see I'm in the negative X areas. And more specifically, I am at the point -5 in the X direction. And looking at how far up I am, I can just trace this along and bingo, I am up 4 units in the positive Y direction. So, therefore, I can say my point C, my locations for point C, my location, I should say, for point C is -5 in the X direction. And it's customary for X to come first, like we've seen in these two examples. And I am +4 in the Y direction. So we can actually see in this plane how we can kind of navigate here, because in this kind of first little kind of quarter of my XY plane, I have positive X. All my X's are positive in this little quarter. All my Y's are also positive. Now, in this one here, my X is negative and my Y is positive. This is just shorthand to say positive and negative because I'm not really bothered writing it out. And now here, my X is negative. My Y is also negative. And finally here, my X is positive. And my Y is negative. And all these points kind of check out. My A had positive X, positive Y. So it was located up here. My B had negative X, negative Y. So it makes sense that it would be located in this quadrant. And we call these things quadrants. We pretty much, because we separate our XY plane into kind of 4 separate kind of quarters, we can call these quadrants. And finally, my C, well, we found that it was located over here. So it would make sense that whatever I got for X was negative, whatever I got for Y is positive. And that's exactly what I got here. I got a negative X and I got a positive Y. Now, that is how we navigate around our XY plane. And in the next video, we're going to look into kind of the nitty-gritty of how we can start to look at linear relationships and how my X's and Y's, how these interact with each other, what impact they have on one another. But looking at Descartes' coordinate plane, we are essentially now, I hope, a lot more comfortable with finding points, locating kind of points on this numerical map. And hopefully we'll also be comfortable with, when given a point, finding its respective coordinates, which we did in our last example. I'll see you guys next time.